Hi, I'm Jared Fuller. Welcome to Scratching the Surface. My guest today is Oliver Munday, who I would argue is one of the foremost designers of book jackets working today. His covers for Colson Whitehead or Tressie McMillan Cotton or Sam Lipsyte already feel like modern classics. His work is bold and subversive, but it's also quiet and profound. At their best, they open up new understandings of the texts that they envelop. In an industry where more and more book covers look more and more alike, Oliver's jackets run the other way. He cut his teeth working with another great book designer and a previous guest on this show, Peter Mendelsohn at Knopf. And later they went to The Atlantic, where the two launched a redesign of that magazine that to me also feels very subversive in its minimalism and thoughtfulness, and is still one of my recent favorite magazine redesigns of the last couple of years. He's currently the executive director of art and design at Doubleday Books. But to be honest, we don't talk about any of that work in this conversation. Oliver's first book of fiction, a short story collection called Head of Household, was just published by Simon & Schuster. The stories in that book all revolve around fatherhood. What does it mean to be a dad today? What is the responsibility of the father? How do fathers adapt to the changing world around them? It's a moving and complex and very real set of stories that raise questions of politics and culture and societal norms. And I was really interested in talking to Oliver about where these stories came from and how they developed and how they may or may not relate to his design work. So this is a conversation less about book covers and more about books. In the first half, we talk about the stories of Head of Household, why fatherhood was a rich subject for him to explore and to especially explore in fiction. We talk about his process and the ideas he was interested in and the complex questions for today's fathers. On the back half, we talk about this move from design to writing. As you'll hear, Oliver was pushing against the limits of what he thought he could do with design, and we talk about how he looked for other outlets to make things. This becomes, I think, a really surprisingly personal conversation about the desire to make things, the feeling like you have something to say, but you're not quite sure where or how to say it. For Oliver, that became fiction, and by focusing his creative energies there, it changed his own relationship to design, which is still his day job. He sees that work in a new way. I know his story deeply resonated with my own journey in and around design and my own conflicted feelings about the work that I have done and the work that I'm doing. And I have a feeling that his story will be relatable to many of the listeners here. This is a really, really fun and interesting conversation. If you like this show and what we do here, you can support our work by joining our Substack. We have a monthly newsletter that's free for everybody, but we also have a paid tier that gets you bonus interviews each month and really helps keep this show free for everybody. I say it all the time, but it's true. I want this show to feel like you're listening to a great conversation inside a coffee shop. And really, for the price of a cup of coffee a month, you can help us do this work and put more of these conversations into the world. It really means a lot. Oliver Munday, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
You have this new book of short stories out. This is your first book of fiction. It's called Head of Household, and it's a collection of stories that really broadly are about fatherhood, what it means to be a father today, the conflicts and complications of that. What were you trying to explore with these ideas, or what did you want to say about the experience of being a father, or your experience of being a father through these stories?
Yeah, I mean that's a great kickoff question, and it's a tough question to answer because
I
I
start I
think
start
that
with the hard questions here.
yeah, yeah, no, 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 I get it. Um, I mean, frankly, there just is not much of a presence in fiction and contemporary fiction of fatherhood, in its domestic
Hmm.
sense. And I think that there are a lot of, social and political reasons for that. Um, and I remember, like when you're, on the sort of journey to become a parent, you're given all of this literature. You're given
Yeah.
recommendations for books, and there are, I think, as there should be, there's more literature available for mothers and for women, and some of those are great books that dads should read as well. And the books that dads get are like they're sort of couched in this like outmoded masculine sort of like
Right.
this is like this is your toolkit, or this is like the it just there's something kind of like pandering about it, and it
Mhm.
really does not make you excited, or I don't know, it treats it in a strange way. And so i felt frustrated by that at the time, and just feeling like there's not like I love reading, and there's just nothing that I can tell, even in the I mean, there are great memoirs about fatherhood and things like that, but just I found very few things that spoke to, in any honest sense, like what it was like,
Hmm.
even in its like mundanity, and it's just there in its challenge and its difficulty and all of that. So I a friend of mine, a writer, Andrew Martin, recommended a
Mm.
book to me.
Early work? Is
Yeah,
that Andrew Martin?
exactly.
I love that
Yeah,
book. Yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
he's great.
So,
He's an amazing writer, and he recommended this book by Chris Batchelder called Abbott Awaits,
mm,
and it's a novel. It was published in the early aughts, maybe, by a university press, which is sort of strange for
okay.
fiction.
Yeah.
And it blew my mind because it is basically it's a story of an academic dad who has a 2-year-old daughter and a pregnant wife, and it follows him through his days in the summer where he's watching his kid. And it's like you get these amazing set pieces that are like filled with I think really what it is, it's the sort of struggle to make meaning from that
Yeah.
just complete, like that boredom, and that just repetitive, the way that time just feels like it doesn't move at all, and you're in that thick space, and it's so funny and smart. And I mean, it's the best thing that I read, that I was like, this is cathartic. I feel seen.
Yeah.
And I read it when my daughter was about the same age. There's it gets into cleaning up vomit out of the back of the car and reading a story 100 times, and just like how sort of surreal these things can become. And I was like, this is incredible. Like,
Yeah.
why
Yeah.
aren't there more things like this?
Yeah.
So I didn't realize until much later that, like, I guess I didn't turn that interest and that excitement into sort of my own version of that until later. But I really wanted to try and get at some of the truth of the experience as I understand it, in a similar way to that. That book is different, but it did something that I thought was very compelling.
Yeah.
And that was, I think, probably the beginning of me thinking about fatherhood on the page, like how it can, how it can compel, and how it does make meaning from that mundanity, which I feel like is part of the challenge.
Yeah, I mean, you wrote about this idea of this kind of like lack of literature on fatherhood
Yeah.
in 2022 for The Atlantic, and
Yeah.
you
And it was
write.
about that book. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, right. And you write, being recommended books is a typical rite of postpartum passage, and the market brims with parenting literature. Motherhood as a subject is covered from most conceivable angles. One can read Danzy Senna, Sheila Heti, Emily Oster, and Danny McLean and gain a deep understanding of mothering through race, economics, and feminism. For fathers, fathers, the pool of options is a bit shallower. This is sort of what you're
Yeah,
talking
I mean
about.
that's it. Yeah,
And I'm wondering, could you talk a little bit about that? But before we get into some of the stories in the book, could you
sure.
talk about these kind of different lenses of literature? I'm struck by, in that passage I just read, race, economics, feminism. I feel like in your book you're tackling these different angles
Yeah,
and the different stories. How did you think about what you wanted to say about fatherhood, or the lenses through which you wanted to look about fatherhood in these stories?
I think that it part of the difficulty in imagining this book, and I got to give a huge amount of credit to both my agent and Molly Atlas and my editor Yadon Israel at Simon and Schuster, because Molly was the one who told me after I wrote one story, which is Vandal. Originally, it was called Getting Up, and she was like, I was writing novels at the time, or trying to, not doing it very well, and she was like, "You should write about fatherhood." And my first reaction was, "But that's not like I felt like I didn't want to be pigeonholed. I didn't
Yeah.
want to." But there was something deeper than that, and I think it has to do with this sort of like very sort of misogynistic view of what art is and what it should,
Mm,
and the reasons for that have come out of what I've read myself over time,
hmm.
where fathers are not seen in their natural habitats. They're out where the adventure lies, which is beyond the home usually. And so for me, I was like, but that's not going to be interesting to any. And then, that was the sort of reflexive response. And then I was like, oh, wait, no,
Yeah.
she's right. And as soon as I accepted that, which was a matter of minutes, really, I was like, okay, let me think about it. I got off the phone and I was like, wait, what about a collection of stories that looks
Ah,
at fatherhood from all of these different vantage points? In a way, it seeks to kind of like be a varied assortment of like it's like filling holes, almost like all those
yeah.
things that you mentioned that we can find in the literature that is geared towards moms and women. There are all these amazing, you can look at the intersection of all these things. And so I was like, okay, how can I start to get at some of those things? But at the center of most of these stories is a sense of a domesticated
Yes.
man, which is like, there's something obviously about that idea in itself,
Yeah.
which is newer in
Yeah.
terms of like, if we look at it socioeconomically, like this is a reality that men are not. I mean, the title is obviously ironic. Like we are not the head of household in to a greater degree now than 20 years ago, and it's sort of, you can feel it's shifting, and
Yeah.
we are having these conversations you know about the economics of it, and like, does it make sense to work when you have to pay a nanny 50 grand a year?
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
like there are these
Yep.
all these calculations you make, and it's becoming more and more the case that like men are staying home and they're doing those things, and if not, they're trying to. There's more equality in the sort of domestic labor. Not that it's anywhere near being equal, but like there's at least an awareness. And I think what happens in these stories is the men are they have not fully accepted that yet.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah, so it's like this fulcrum moment, and they're sort of like trying to be good, but they're not really good, and
Yes.
and so that's what it's the historical moment has not fully hardened yet. So it's
Yes.
like they're they don't know. This is like, they're I don't know, they're trying to find their footing in this moment, and what it means for their sense of self and like their own sense of masculinity and all of that stuff.
Yes. That was exactly my kind of the way I read these stories. What you just articulated was my experience reading this, in
I'm
that
so glad to hear that.
these are men who are trying to do something new.
Yeah,
They're trying to stay home. They're trying to be more active. All of these things you're talking about, and yet there's something nagging in them.
Hmm.
There is this sense of wanting to go out, wanting to
Yeah.
go explore, wanting
Yeah.
to go do other things, like you're talking about, like the typical kind of fatherhood stories,
Yeah.
and the tension comes in trying to be there for their kids, trying to be there for their
Yeah.
partner, um, and then also wanting to go somewhere else. You mentioned the story Vandal, which was a story I really liked a lot that I felt like also kind of encapsulates a lot of these. I was wondering if you could read a passage of that for
Sure.
us that we can kind of just talk about one of these stories in a little more detail. So this is a story called Vandal. This is a third story in the collection. If there's anything else you want to say about it before you read it, but I'd love to just kind of hear the first part of that story.
Yeah. I feel like it's a great story for this reason for this show because, as you said, I mean, it was the first story I wrote, and
Mhm.
so it contains the beginning of this idea, but it also, it also has a protagonist who has creative
Right,
aspirations.
right. That's the other thing I was thinking
And so
about.
it's
Yeah.
like, and obviously that I drew from my own experience in certain ways. But yeah, I'll just read from the beginning. That his name is Jason has ceased to matter. He would love simply to go by Dad or Daddy, but since her third birthday weeks ago, Carrie has been stubborn or dedicated, depending on the angle, and he has only been Steve. Steve. He was mortified by the comparison to a goofy kids YouTuber who seemed only to get balder and pudgier in each new clip. But he gave up protesting once he realized Carrie's commitment was hitched to his frustration. It is early, always early. Light sprays in through the living room window, misted with dust, turning the old wood floor golden. Jason shuts his eyes against it. He imagines the sun as a tiny hole in a faraway nozzle. His wife, Hannah, is asleep in the next room. Every room in their small apartment is the next room. Since Carrie was 9 months old, Jason has been the one to get up with her each day and watch her until the nanny arrives. Hannah's job as a PR strategist is demanding, more important and more lucrative than his. The morning is his shift, his half of the parenting peace agreement, a trial of not counting down the minutes. Dat, Carrie catches herself. Steve! She pauses, leaning over to reach beneath the couch and grab the new toy that her aunt, Hannah's sister, sent her recently. A light up drawing board that's impossible to clean. Let's draw. Draw now? She smears a strand of hair away from her face with the heel of her hand, holding out a peach colored marker. He sits up, regretting his question. Of course we can. What should we draw? You draw something. Carrie jabs the marker at him. She flicks the background light off and on. She stares at his hand. He uncaps the marker, puts the tip on the board, and quickly picks it back up. Please, Steve? He stares at the blackboard once more. Streaks are smudged along the plastic. He thinks of the lewd doodles he used to draw in his school textbooks, but begins drawing the curved line of a bird. The proportion of the head is too small. What is it? She asks. Nothing, he says. He wipes the line away and stops short of drawing something else.
Thank you. That was great.
Thank you very much.
We're getting a little of what we were just talking about. There's this kind of caretaking that's happening.
Mm-hmm.
There's a partner in the other room. There's memories of an old creative life. There's a sense of wanting to draw something that is
Yeah.
inappropriate for him to draw with his daughter. You said that there's some kind of personal, this comes from kind of personal experience. Talk about the development of the story a little bit and kind of how you started to fictionalize some of these ideas, to
Yeah.
explore these larger themes, to not just talk about your own experience, but to kind of wrestle with these larger cultural contexts.
Yeah. I mean, it was funny because it happened. It was like a cold morning, and my daughter really did have a similar toy to this, and I picked up the pen and I wrote my this tag that I hadn't written in
Mm,
a long
yeah,
time, and it was just like completely the muscle memory kicked in, and it was so, I don't know, it was almost like it happened despite my intention,
yeah.
and I was like, that's pretty crazy, and I texted it to a couple friends who have known me for a long time, and they were like, "Oh yeah, like," because Moat was actually my tag back
All right.
then, and they were like, "You gotta, like." get the paint cans
which is the
out.
tag in the story
Yeah,
also.
yeah.
Yeah.
I felt like it had this like obviously metaphorical quality to it that
Yeah.
I was not aware of at the time. um, but they were like, "Yeah, you should go out and paint again." And I started thinking like, man, that would be crazy if there was a story and the guy actually started going out again.
Right.
And that was it. And I was like, they were like, oh, like laughing and sort of, I started to spitball a little bit, not because I intended to write anything, but just like, oh, that would be interesting. And then I don't know, maybe a year and a half or 2 years later, I was like, that idea just stuck with me. And I thought, I got to just do it. And I had never written a story before because, as I said before, I
Right.
had tried and failed to write novels as a way. Self-taught. I learned by sharing work with friends who are writers, and I was intimidated by the short story for
Hmm.
many reasons. And so it wasn't until after the fact that I did that, and something felt more natural in a way about the form of the story for me and how I think and how I write.
Tell me more about that, because that's sort of leading into what my next question was going to be, because you're obviously interested in fatherhood, becoming a father yourself. You're interested in reading about fatherhood as a reader, like we talked about. You've
Yeah,
published some essays on fatherhood. The essay
yeah,
in the Atlantic that I talked about, you wrote for the in the Believer about fatherhood.
yeah,
What was it about writing fiction specifically, as opposed to the essay or the review or even the memoir, that
yeah,
was interesting to you or allowed you to explore these ideas in a new way or a more expansive
yeah.
way? What was it about fictionalizing sort of these dads in different contexts? What did that give you that you wouldn't have gotten otherwise?
I think it's very simply just the 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 wider berth to
Mhm.
explore and to push these ideas to a more extreme place through these characters and settings. And what I realized, I mean, in the way that story came from an experience in life, but then was imagined and sort of expanded uh, quite a bit. That I felt like that was a great method, but then also, that's only the beginning. It could be the case that like it's not from an experience that happened to me so viscerally that involved all of these aspects of memory and history, and it was just like imagining a scenario or a dynamic and then building it out. And I think that to try and capture the some of the tension, it just seemed like the way to create a more varied portrait of
Right.
fatherhood and masculinity. It seemed a more effective way to do that by illustrating some examples as opposed to, you know, doing the um, doing the sort of like the research and the reading around. Because I mean, frankly,
Right.
like I loved Abbott Awaits, and I'm so passionate about that book. It was very easy to, but there, like I don't know, like if I were to think right now about
Yeah.
writing an essay about like I wouldn't know where to go.
Right. Right. Right.
So
Well, so let's like stay on this thread for a second, because we've been talking for a bit now and we've not mentioned that you are probably better known as a graphic designer.
definitely much better known.
That's like the job, is that you're a
Yeah.
you're a designer, and you've designed some of the most iconic book covers of today. Where did writing become a part of this practice or this work? Or tell me where the interest in writing yourself as opposed to designing for other writers, when did that
Yeah.
start? How did that begin?
I mean, I've thought about this question so often, and I think first in a kind of like almost primal sense, like I always wanted to make something, like to
Mm-hmm.
create something, to make something that was my own.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't really know, I wasn't aware of that. I think that part of that desire drove my creativity and drove me to design. But I think at a certain point I reached my limit, and I think there were I coming to I went to work at Knopf to design book jackets after a period of sort of personal crisis, not to be too dramatic, but I was just like, why am I doing what I'm doing?
Hmm.
At the time, I had a studio and I like employed two young designers, and I was like, the reasons I was doing these things and taking these jobs was more to just like
Right.
fuel the machine than it was about anything that I was doing for myself, or like I sort of I think I lost what the sort of motivation was. And so I was like, okay, do I like get a studio space and paint for a year? Do I take a year off and just read? What do I do to reset? And then a job came available at Knopf, and I wanted to work with Peter because I had seen how he was starting to. I think he's always written, but like
Hmm.
it was becoming more public that he was writing. He was working on what we see when we read. So I was like, I want to be around that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that was being here with him allowed me to write about design, about covers, about things,
Mm.
and I had never written before. So once that once that started, I felt that something about that sort of like creative impulse was being satisfied in a way that I never really felt as a designer, I don't
Yeah.
think. I think
Yeah.
that, yeah. So that's like one answer, but then it's like I started reading critical theory, and it's like I can't remember which essay or which book this was from, but there was this like there was a kind of like Marxist sense of a practitioner being in any respect should be able to write about what they do
Mm.
as a very like material expression of it and a way of understanding. And so I think that became a very important thing for me. And then once I started reading more, it's like the fact that I hadn't read Benjamin in undergrad as a designer seemed insane to me,
Right.
because it's
Right.
like,
Same. Yeah.
art in the age of mechanical reproduction, like that should be
Yeah.
freshman year, like that should be like, required reading for a designer.
Yeah. I'm struck by something. I very much relate to the experience that you just articulated of kind of one feeling an impulse to make things
Yeah.
to feeling like there's something you have to say or something you have to put into the world, and then at the same time feeling like you've hit a wall in the like profession or discipline
Yeah.
that you've chosen. And not to not to make this about me, but I want to see
No, of
if you feel
course.
something similar. Something that I've thought about a lot in my own kind of running up to the edges of graphic design, or what I feel like I can do that's interesting in graphic design, is that graphic design can make you feel like you are making something, that you are putting something
Yes.
original into the world, but you don't actually have to say anything. You can rely on other people's words, other people's content, and you are giving that a container. And so you are scratching an itch to make something, but
Yeah.
then you don't actually have to put any of yourself into it if you don't want
Oh,
to,
I
and it
have a
can
lot of
still be
thoughts
good.
about this.
Okay, go. Let's hear it.
I feel like we're inflection artists. Like we don't just graphic design is the ultimate predicate. It does not exist without something else.
Right.
And it's someone else's idea, or it's someone else's phrase, or it's someone else's art even that we respond to, and
Yeah.
we wrap and we present and we, communicate through. And so I think that is very exciting and thrilling. You start to see your work in the world, and whether it's a poster, a billboard, or a book in a bookstore, it's like that's exciting. But I think what I realized over time is that I was just slowly becoming alienated from what I
Hmm.
was making, because there is this illusion that it's yours,
Yeah.
but it's not. That's never the case. And so when people would ask, well, what do you like? Why don't you work on personal projects? I could not figure out what that
Yes.
was as a
Yes.
designer. That just doesn't exist, because then the minute you take away the client, it's just art, I guess. But you can't, like, what are you going to make graphic art? You could do that, but it's not graphic design anymore.
Yeah, yeah, and it feels different in some way, or it's
It's
like, well,
definitely different.
what is the content? You're looking
Yeah.
for something to do. I'm struck by I hope I'm not stretching connections here, but
No, by all means, stretch away.
you saying that reminds me of Hilton Howell's introduction to your book, Don't Sleep, where he describes your work as that what you're doing is you're working with words, you're making writing visible. And he describes your work. I'm going to do this annoying thing where I'm going to read you a compliment that he gave you in your book and have you respond to it.
Yeah.
But he talks about your approach and he says, he writes in, and this is the introduction to your monograph. That is what impels the true artist, or should, not the desire for fame or glory, but a deeper understanding and feeling when it comes to the good and necessary questions. What is the world like without me and with me? And how can I see it, imagine it for myself? And I was thinking about that as you were talking, because he's writing about that in regards to your design work,
Yeah.
in regards to your approach to your design work. And we're now talking about the limits of that work and
Yeah.
this desire for fiction to say something new. Do you see those questions? What is the world without me and with me? And how can I see it, imagine it for myself, that Hilton is kind of putting onto to your work? Is
Yeah.
that the
I mean,
same for writing? Like, is that do you agree with him?
no, I mean, the thing
You know what
about
I mean?
Hilton, yeah, I do. I mean, I think that there is you know, I I think that there's something that happens when an outsider, so to speak, someone who isn't a practitioner of design in any way, writes about it. You know, especially like working in books. You tell someone that you're a book jacket designer, and they're like, "That's so cool! Like that's such a cool job." And yes, on the face of it, like it is a very cool job, and it's creative and it's interesting and stuff. And so I think that there's a lot that you can say, especially with coming from a mind like Hilton's. He like reading White Girls for the first time, like
Yeah, yeah,
changed my. I was like, this dude is so he's like such a unique thinker
yeah.
and such an amazing stylist. I couldn't. I just it was like an inconceivably good book, and so
Yeah, he's one of those people, not to turn this into a Hilton Als praise
yeah,
podcast, but he's one of those people that no matter what his subject is, I will read
doesn't
it because
matter.
I know he's going to be thinking about
Yeah,
it in a smart, interesting, he's going to get
exactly.
me to think about something. And so yeah, I
And he does
totally
it. He does so in a generous way. I
yeah.
think he's a yeah, and so I think he applied that to design and was able to kind of like rend some meaning and beauty from that. And I don't disagree with it at all. And for me, I was very touched because when I first met him, we had lunch, and at the time he was posting on his Instagram. He would take these like portraits
Oh
of
right.
people,
Right. I remember
and he
that.
posted one of me, and I was very sheepish about writing. I was like, I only I really want to write, but I'm not. And he wrote like Oliver Monday the date, and then he wrote writer comma designer, and I was
Mhm.
like, it's the first time anyone. And I was like, that's so
Yeah.
sweet. I don't think of myself that way because yeah, I think it's just been a tough, trying kind of journey to get to where to get to the place of this book that it's hard to be like, oh no, I'm a
Yeah.
writer.
Yeah.
It feels kind of like phony.
Yep. Yep.
Um, so yeah, I think that I mean I was floored by what he said, and I think that I can appreciate the quality of it from an aesthetic POV, but like the cynical part of me that has been so like I don't know, just overrun by what I do and what I've done for so long. I feel like yeah, it's hard to. I guess it was nice to be reminded of that
Well,
because yeah,
yeah, I mean, yeah, sorry to cut you off, but I'm
no,
almost
no,
wondering if that line that is really generous and a generous reading of your work, if trying to be a writer, trying to write fiction, trying to write
yeah,
novels, was that a way to be truer to those questions?
yeah,
That
absolutely,
design felt like you were sort of like what I was talking about. It feels like you're making something, but you're sort of just making a
yeah,
representation of something.
yeah,
And writing
yeah.
was a way to like live up to that in some way, or to do that in some, you know what I
You
mean?
can never satisfy the instinct that uh you know presupposes that creativity. Like that's
Yeah.
the thing I think that design never. That's the trick of it.
Yeah.
Um, and I writing is just a completely different, like, there's no reason other than the fact that I want it to be in the world that it is in the world. And so writing satisfies something that, I think I always assume just because I have worked in a visual or in visual mediums for my life, media, like I always assumed that it would be visual, whatever that would be, like,
Yeah.
but I didn't want to paint, I didn't want to do, like, I just didn't have the desire to make things in that way. And I think the expression that the only other thing I tried to do for a short period of time was like dabble in music,
Okay.
which was probably the most like excite like the that as a form of expression I feel like is at the top of the hierarchy.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think if you like short of that for me, it's after music is literature and then visual art. So,
Yeah.
I think that there was something that I was able to express in in writing that I could never express visually. And um yeah, I mean, so much of the way that I write comes from the way that I see the world, which also obviously informs how I make work in design. Like I love like precise descriptions of things because it's a very, like quick way to render something so vividly in the mind. And I think that
Hmm.
that's so similar to, I mean, there's a lot in that that I try to do with design, or I think that there are lots of sort of like commonalities and lots of
Yeah.
echoes across the forms.
I want to ask you about that, but let me ask you just a
Yeah.
quick question that I'm was thinking about on your kind of previous answer about having something to say. And I hope this does not sound like a reductive question, and I'm not I'm trying to ask this in a really open-ended way,
Hmm.
but I'm curious how you personally went from this idea of like, oh, if you should do personal projects, and you're like, well, that's not like, I don't know what I would say, what, like, I need
Yeah.
content, I need a thing. What was that switch, or what was it, how did you get through that to say like, oh, I have a novel, I want to write a novel, like, what, how do you go from I don't have to make the content, someone gives me the content, to actually I do have content, I do have ideas, I
Yeah.
do have something to say? When did that happen, or how did that happen, or how, I'm curious
Yeah.
about that, because we're kind of talking on both sides of I've hit
Yeah.
the limit and now I have a short story collection.
Right. So what does
There's
that look like?
yeah.
I mean, it literally just means opening up a page and like starting to. I started to write a very like autobiographical like Bildungsroman about my high school years, and like I just started and I literally did not look back until I had written I think 100,000 words or
Oh
something.
wow, okay.
And that was insane to do because when I did look back, I was almost crippled by how bad it was.
Right.
But I had to finish because I had to feel like I did it.
Mm-hmm.
And that only happened because of those things I mentioned before about writing, about design, allowing me to feel like I could write and I could think through something clearly. And then also at the time when I was working at Knopf, I befriended an editorial assistant named Andrew Ridker, who has since gone on to
Mm.
become a
Yeah.
novelist. And he's wanted to be a novelist since he was probably 10,
Mm.
like,
Mm-hmm.
and he was working on stuff and we would just talk about literature all the time. And I never really seriously thought about writing fiction. And then I don't know what it was that in through those conversations, I was like, I should just try something. And I remember him being like, just take some, like, get a pack of index cards and like map out a story. And I had this story that was going to be about I had this surgery when I was in fourth grade because of an infected sinus. I had to
Oh
have a
wow.
full craniotomy.
Oh wow.
And so I spent a lot of time in the hospital, and it's a very, very obviously a very formative experience for me. And I was like, okay, I remember these details about the hospital, and I could like, and I started to map that out, and then I was like, this is doesn't feel, and so I was like, I'm just gonna start. I'm just gonna start. I'm just gonna like
Yeah.
start a start a project about my upbringing, and then I just did, and then we started like a writers group, and I was we were held accountable, and we would have these things where it was like, all right, 1,000 words a day, and
Yeah.
we were literally working side by side in cubicles, and
Wow.
like did you hit your word count today? And we would give each other praise, and he would look at things and be like, that's good, but this is the thing that's actually good. This is you trying to write. And it took me years to get rid of that instinct to sort of like appear like I was writing, and it's
Yeah.
like, God, that was so hard to shake. And
Yeah.
once I was like, but the stuff you're pointing out is so easy. Like that's not the stuff. Like I want to sound like I'm a pro star. I want to be Bello, And it's
Right.
like, we all want to be Bello, but like relax.
Right.
And so it took me years to shake that and to figure out that you know how to do it. Like that clarity should come first, and like all these things that were very uh hard won lessons, but it literally just started on a weekend afternoon and
Yeah.
opening up
I love
a
that.
Google Doc.
I love that. I have, I'm going to ask you a series of questions back to
Mm.
back that may or may not be related, but in my mind seem related. And so if you want to pick them apart or ignore some of
Sure.
these questions, go for it. But I'm curious how, I think there's a process to these questions. I'm curious how designing book covers changed how you read. You wrote a great essay for LitHub about how you don't always read the entire book. Sometimes you felt like you had to read the book. You read until you sort of get an idea. But I'm curious if thinking about how do I represent a book visually, did that change how you read? And then did that process inform how you write? Do you think that the way you read in thinking about what a cover would look like, did that have any bearing on then the type of writing that you did? And then did that then circle back and change the design work at all? Like, do you think writing fiction has now changed how you approach designing book covers? So
Yeah.
how do you read? How do you read affect how you write? And then how does how you write
Yeah.
affect how you design?
Yeah. I mean, I'm going to attempt to answer
Okay.
this as honestly as possible. And I think that read, I think that design hasn't changed how I read.
Okay.
I think that I have always read with a designer's mind, for better or for worse. Like I can't help it, sort of. The things that speak to me, the things that are seared in my memory, are what they are because that's the way they are. And so when I started writing about covers and what covers did, and this was influenced by Peter and with his sort of encouragement, I realized that if you look at cover outtakes, if you look at making covers, it's actually like a pretty compelling form of literary criticism, because you're reducing a text to these sort of emblematic things and these visuals that can tell you a lot about what the book is. And obviously there is no right cover,
Right.
you know.
Right.
There are only ones that sort of like fail in less apparent ways than other. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
you cannot render the complexity of a book in an image. You can approximate really well, and you can do all the things that design is supposed to do,
Right.
seduce, and all of that. So I think that process was really interesting to me, because it allowed me to think about literary criticism and
Yeah.
think about people like Roland Barthes, and sort of like for a time I thought about design in a new way, as a tool of criticism and sort of almost of theory, as opposed to strictly a visual medium, and I think that the I don't know, like
I mean, it's interesting you saying that because as you were saying that, I was kind of thinking about this idea that in a way, a cover, in the way you're kind of talking about it, in the cover is doing two things. It is both a critique or an interpretation or a theory
yeah,
of the book. It is a form of literary criticism, but in another way, it's also sort of a fiction. It's
yeah,
you are creating an idea about what this book is.
yeah,
That may or may not be actually directly related in the book. And so in some way there is a kind of fictive quality
yeah.
to that, perhaps.
That's interesting. I've never thought about it like that, but that's very true. You're making something, and depending on how you do it, like sometimes what you make, like it could be a response to something in the book, but does not come from the book itself. So
Exactly.
it is,
Yeah.
yeah, and sometimes it is taken from the book, quite literally. But then that's the challenge of like those sort of cross communication of the
Hmm.
process, and like you know there's obviously you're working with language in the title, you're working with the form, and you're working with the whatever the visual is that is
Yeah.
gonna, like, it's a response, like you can create a tension or
Yeah.
it can be you know those two things can dovetail, or they could be juxtaposed or whatever, and that's part of
Yeah.
the fun. But I think that the the fun of looking back at outtakes is like, oh man, this makes this book look like this thing that it is in one way, but it also it is very different, and so it becomes a way to kind of like think about the strains of the book
Yeah.
in a way to understand it better. And it's not like you think about that as you're making it necessarily. It's only in retrospect that you see, okay, what were these impulses? Where do they come from? They were in
Hmm.
response to the language, and it could be a scene
Right.
or a
Right.
character or an idea. And so I think that that process yielded very interesting results, and helped me better understand the medium. But I don't think design ever changed the way that I read.
So did that process, that idea of maybe giving you a new way to think about design, which I think is actually an interesting kind of flip side to this, did that have any influence on the writing, do you think?
No, writing allowed me to channel that deep urge that I have
Hmm.
always
Hmm.
felt. And I think what happened is it took the burden off of design to do that. So design became a different thing altogether, which is to say it's my day job. And I like that. I don't want to get that creative satisfaction that I get from, I don't want to get that out of design. It's impossible for me to. So giving that up has been an incredible relief to me. And I think in a way it allows me to do my job better, because the other interesting part about design to me is like we're always battling the sort of capital C client, right? Like we're
Hmm.
always trying to, even with books, like we're trying to get away with something for ourselves.
Yeah.
And I don't do that anymore. I'm like, I want the stuff to look good, but I want it to look good for you, not for
Right.
me.
Right.
And so it's a different like prerogative altogether for me. And I much prefer having writing as the outlet and the medium through which I can get creative fulfillment,
Yeah.
and design no longer needs to do that, or I don't
That's
have to
interesting.
pretend that it can.
I think that's really interesting to think about, that this burden being taken off of design. And I'm just thinking about the look, I don't want this to sound overly negative or didactic in any way, but I'm just thinking about the state of book cover design, thinking about the state of design generally, and just how much of it looks the same,
It's so terrible,
how little sort of
so depressing.
formal interest there is. I mean, I think in book design, sure, but also in branding, in digital
I'm sure.
design, it's just all so similar, and it's so kind of captured by what sells,
I know.
market, what's trendy. Does that concern you any? I mean, it sort of sounds like you have less, with that that kind of relief that you are like, how do you deal with that? Or maybe like, is writing a way for you to not have to think about that, because you don't have to think about what's going to sell, how's this going to look on the,
Yeah.
how do you kind of reconcile that?
I mean, it concerns me as a reader if we're talking about book covers, because I think what's happening and what's been happening for the last probably, I don't know, like 8 years roughly, like
Yeah.
the way
Yeah.
that book covers look now, I think it's like it's doing such a great disservice to literature, because
Yeah.
it's making these books look like things that they aren't. And I just, it's really depressing. It's not as depressing for like, is it annoying to walk around a bookstore and be like, okay, here's the sort of like floral
Yeah.
explosion, here's the blob thing. It's like, yeah, that's depressing, but like I can separate it. Just when you think about it in terms of like what the books are, and I've just seen like, I've seen novels, I've seen books that just like do not look like what they are, and it's like, how did this happen? Like, you are, in trying to reach everyone, you're like alienating the actual, quote unquote target audience of what this thing is, and you're
Yeah.
you're you're lying to them because you want to reach more
Mm.
people.
Hmm.
And that that is terrible for an individual book.
Yeah.
And that makes me sad, but I mean, that sadness only goes so far, you know. It's a very typical late capitalist sadness.
Yeah. So is that something you're still conscious of as a designer when you're thinking about covers? How aware are you
Oh
of,
yeah, I don't want to do that.
okay.
I don't want to be guilty of that. What I just,
Yeah.
that sort of
Are you,
what
I
I
mean,
just
like,
diagnosed.
are you able to sell the alternative? Are you able, I'm
I
thinking
think
about what you
so.
said earlier, where it's like your client, your author, you want them to be happy.
Yeah. It's more
Is,
like, I think that I have a really good relationship with Doubleday's publisher, Bill Thomas, and I understand his sensibility, and I it helps me do my job well. And
mhm.
I think that I'm always like, I don't want to make work that look like, obviously I want to make things that stand out and that look good,
Mhm.
like that are smart and clear and whatever. I'm not trying to get away with some sort of like avant-garde typeless jacket. Like, I'm not, that's not my motivation anymore. It was once
Yeah.
upon a time.
Yeah. Yeah.
But now I think that it is just like, I want to do right by the authors, the publisher, everyone who's has a stake in this. And
Mhm.
I think that there's a way to do that and still make things look good, that don't that feel unique and that feel like a refraction of the book, as opposed to just, like chasing the whims of the market, which is literally what
Right.
a lot of these sales departments will have. They'll be like, "Oh, you know, we want it to look like this because this worked." And that is just such a kind of like broad assumption that's founded
Right.
on such like mysticism that you're like, "Oh, that worked. You're now it worked.
Yeah.
You're gonna say that's because of the cover." It's like, it's just, there's no way to know what works and what doesn't with a jacket. It's just impossible.
As we kind of come to a close, I want to go back in time. I want to go to mid 2000s. You're a sophomore at
Uh-oh.
Woodrow Wilson High School in
Oh
Washington,
boy.
D.C. There's a new arts and
I'll
humanities.
send you the drawer novel. You can read the whole
Oh, yeah.
story for yourself. No, I'm
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
kidding.
I want to. There's this new arts and humanities initiative that
Oh
was
yeah,
launched in the
yeah.
district, and you enroll in this class called Intro to Computer Graphics. I think the teacher's name was Mr. Botorf, Mr.
Oh my
Botorf.
God, yeah. Changed my life.
Tell me about the experience being in that class. You've described it as a realization that graphic design was everywhere. You referred to it as omnipresent to the point of invisibility, and a thrilling revelation.
It
And
was at the time.
well, that's what I want to ask you about. I'm
Yeah.
struck by that sort of wonder and excitement at this thing that is everywhere, omnipresent to the point of invisibility, and which
Part
I
of why design is so dangerous.
right. And the reason I want to go back to this is because I relate to this as a sophomore who also discovered graphic
Yeah.
design around the same time as you did, had this sort of excitement. and then now feels kind of burnt by it, feel that,
Yeah.
we've been talking about it not in a positive way, not as a
No.
thrilling
Right.
revelation.
Right.
Tell me what was so thrilling about it to you as a sophomore in high school at Woodrow Wilson High School?
Yeah.
And if any of that still, if you still have any of that, like what excites you, if anything, about design today?
Man.
And I'm asking that selfishly as somebody who's looking for
No,
excitement
I
too.
know. I totally understand. I think at the time you can, like I think as a kid in high school, the idea of being in a class where I was working on a computer felt like pretty
Mm,
badass and not
hmm.
like doing work. So there's that part of it. And the whim of just signing up for this class, not knowing really what it was, only that it involved computers and graphics. Like, I think I had some vague awareness of what a poster design looked like. And obviously, I grew up in the wake of DC hardcore and was like a huge Fugazi fan. And like, there's a certain DIY aesthetic that I think is it's very just it's gritty and it's compelling and it's all these things that I think the best parts of design were sort of embodied in that. But then to learn that these like products that were, you walked by an aisle. I mean, for me, it was this Band-Aid box that I was supposed to redesign. I was like, man, this could be anything. And like, not only that, it's like this could be in the world. There
Yeah.
was something about taking those elements and like reducing them and changing them that felt like I had been endowed with a kind of, I don't know, like a special power or something. It was just so exciting to me. And the fact that that could be a profession, I was like, that's crazy. And I mean, it was literally, I was so blinkered from that point on. I didn't want to do anything else. Like I knew what I wanted to do. I knew where I wanted to go. I knew I didn't care about any other, which I regret now because I should have taken advantage of the sort of like, the educational offerings outside of design at Micah and
Yeah.
Hopkins and stuff.
We're the same. Yeah.
Yeah, and I was like, no, I just want to destroy my critiques and I want to do the work and I want to like I was just so insanely passionate and driven about it that I didn't really stop and look around and think until much later. But there was just that initial excitement of being like, this thing is literally everywhere you look,
Yeah.
and you could partake in that.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like you were telling me my
Yeah.
history there too. I very much relate to that. I want to end with one more question that I think relates to this or builds on this. And this is also from your book Don't Sleep. In your introduction, and you're writing about graphic design and you're writing about your approach to graphic design, and you write, the practice refuses a neat definition, but on certain days it feels like a kind of bricolage where I'm using the substance at hand to create something new. On others, designing means I'm in a Greek chorus, close enough to comment yet outside the main narrative. Often the materials I use come complete with their own internal languages and histories that I arrange in order. Maybe it's something like storytelling after all. And I wanted to end there because I think that's a nice, really open definition of design.
Oh, to be young again.
But I also think that in a way that describes writing, that describes
Yeah.
fiction. And so I'm kind of
Yeah.
curious, like, how do these relate to, is writing, do you see writing as an extension of design? Is writing a type of design? What kind of storytelling do you want to do now that this new book
Yeah.
is out that's different? Tell me, like, where does all this go with this kind of bricolage of elements, bricolage of
Well,
skills you
clearly
have now?
I was steeped in the curriculum of the Frankfurt School when I
Yeah,
wrote
yeah, yeah.
that.
I
um,
think that's probably why it jumped out to me too. I was like, oh, I
yeah,
speak my
but
language.
yeah, no, I mean, it felt like at that point, I think that I was in writing that like essay for the book and thinking about my work and what I was getting out of it. It led me to look at it anew at that time. And like, I think that there's something very is design storytelling. It that feels like a very um, I don't know. It feels like a very lofty
Yeah.
definition of what it is. It certainly communicates, and it certainly can tell you things, but I don't know that it always tells a story. That I think that sometimes it can point at a story, at a history that already exists, and in a way it can kind of like, it can cobble together meaning from that. And part of what always interested me, and still does, frankly, is taking these existing symbols and like inflecting on them and changing them a little bit, like
Yeah.
taking like the universal signage and those things that uh that are near universal in terms of their visual character and how we are made to interpret them, and like taking them and like twisting them and subverting them and doing that feels exciting to me. And I didn't really understand why, but like I think that there is something very powerful about that aspect. And that is sort of like, not to get too like 90s ad busters about this, but like, designers we have a certain power in that we can make things that, obviously with AI now, it's a very different conversation, but there's there's a lot, um, there's a lot that we can do to, deform and defang and just like underscore or emphasize, like, as designers, there's a certain power in the making of the thing, and in the saying of the thing. So I think, yeah, somewhere in the middle, not quite storytelling, but like, obviously fiction is storytelling, like, full stop. And
Right.
so maybe the belief in that idea is now satisfied in the act of writing. And
Yeah.
so I no longer, again, as we said before, like, I don't look
Yeah.
to design to satisfy those things, but anything that is as ubiquitous as design is, I think deserves a deep critique and
Yeah.
a sort of like very structural analysis that I don't know it has not really happened, and it hasn't happened nearly enough.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I want to keep going, but I feel like that's a
Yeah,
good
I know,
way
me too.
to wrap this up. Congratulations on
Yeah,
the new
thank you so
book.
much.
It's great. I really enjoyed this conversation, and the way you've kind of thought about these different facets of your practice was really helpful for me selfishly.
Yeah, no,
And as I
this
think
was
through mine.
great.
So thanks for
Very
being on the
cathartic
show.
to hear your experience, and like to be able to talk as someone who can recognize a bit of themselves in all of these
Yeah. Yeah.
all of these things. So I appreciate it.
Yeah. Oliver, thank you so much.
Thank you.
That was my conversation with Oliver Munday. His new book, Head of Household, is out now. Our theme music is by Jeremiah Chu. The show is funded thanks to the generosity of listeners like you. If you like what we're doing here, I hope you consider supporting us on Substack and get some bonus content each month. You can follow us across social media at Surface Podcast. You can listen to all of our previous episodes wherever you get your podcasts and at our website, scratchingthesurface.fm. Thanks for listening.